I think the Secretary of State's office should investigate these coordinated efforts by the state Democratic Party, by local county Democratic parties to interfere in the democratic process. So you guys will recall, we've been collecting signatures for Referendum 101, which would send Senate Bill 5599 to voters, which has to do, of course, with parental rights, in my opinion. So I had multiple events across Western Washington. One of them was in the city of Lacey, and counter-protesters showed up. So we're inside this coffee shop in Lacey collecting signatures for Referendum 101, and I would say about 50 people showed up outside, basically painting me and anyone inside as anti-transgender. For the most part, though, they were peaceful, although they had their little umbrellas, as they often do, and were trying to block anyone who was trying to record, including our friend Jonathan Cho. And at the time, I'm like, look, I heard from a few people who came in and expressed that it was intimidating to them to kind of cross the line of protesters to come in and sign the referendum, but they did it anyway. And so I wasn't too worried about it. I don't know if there was anyone who would have come into the coffee shop to sign if not for the protesters. But there was an event over the weekend that a group of volunteers was at to collect signatures for Referendum 101. And they were met by counter-protesters who I really believe crossed the line, violated state law in intimidating individuals who may have wanted to come in and sign Referendum 101. Our friend Jonathan Cho spoke to one of the volunteers who described from her perspective what happened.
A couple women showed up with signs.
Okay, I'm more of a snake than you are.
Saying that we are Nazis and that we are fascists. And then they started blowing a blowhorn every time that someone was coming up to our booth. We were trying to talk to people. They would yell over us. Everyone who approached our booth felt intimidated. And I felt uncomfortable yelling out to anyone who was walking by because they were already being yelled at by these protesters.
Yeah. So this was at Lakewood Summerfest. And, I'm going to read the state law in a moment, but just practically speaking, before I actually read the law that's on the books, if you are coming to maybe consider signing a referendum, and you see people hanging around that are holding up signs calling you a Nazi or a fascist, if you see members of the Black Panther Party, they are holding up signs, would you be willing to still walk up and sign that referendum anyway? I tend to think there's a lot of people who would not. A lot of reasonable people who support Referendum 101, but who would be scared and intimidated by the scene that was playing out there in Lakewood. Now, in watching the video from the event, I believe what happened was against the law. So there are laws in Washington state that protect signature gatherers. I want to read from this RCW for you. It's RCW 29A.84.250 if you want to go read it yourself. And the pertinent portion is this. Every person is guilty of a gross misdemeanor who interferes with or attempts to interfere with the right of any voter to sign or not to sign an initiative or referendum petition, or with the right to vote for or against an initiative or referendum measure by threats, intimidation, or any other corrupt means or practice. And when I read interferes with or attempts to interfere with, and then you look at by means of threats, intimidation, or any other corrupt means or practice, to me, intimidation is what was happening in Lakewood. The act of, again, holding up signs, calling people Nazis, shouting with a bullhorn, to act as if that would not intimidate a reasonable person from walking up and signing a referendum is ridiculous. Of course, that is intimidation. And this is not the first time, by the way, that something like this has happened. I would note, we're going to give an example of some other times that not just if this were just some old wackadoos who showed up and did this, I would still feel strongly about it. But the problem is that this pushback to R101 is being fostered and endorsed by the Democratic Party. The Pierce County Democrats put out this sort of flyer about a couple issues. It warned about, it says, We've been informed that Mothers for Liberty, M4L, may be at the JBLM Freedom Fest this weekend. Their purpose is to obtain signatures supporting Aura 101 entitled Protect Parents' Rights and Kids' Safety. This bill specifically targets children's health care. They go on to say, if you believe Mothers for Liberty should not be permitted to use a federal event to obtain signatures in support of Referendum 101, please call the base legal office. And then it says, if no one answers, please leave a message. And then they go on to say that a captain at the base, told them that Mothers for Liberty would not be permitted to collect signatures there. And so, the Democrats, the Democratic Party in Pierce County, said if you see any Mothers for Liberty requesting signatures, please take a photo of them and send it in. Again, if you're someone trying to collect signatures for a lawful referendum, which is a right of voters in this state, and you have people blowing bullhorns, shouting about Nazis and fascists, if you have people taking your pictures to send it to the military, that's not intimidation. And again, this is not the first time the Democratic Party in Washington state has done something like this. You'll probably recall, because we talked about it on the podcast, when Initiative 1929 was in full swing, which would have repealed the capital gains tax. The then chair of the Washington State Democratic Party, Tina Podlodowski, encouraged people to write into or text into a tip line, a hotline, to let a group called Invest in Law Now know where signature gathering was taking place. Tina Podlodowski said at the time, friends don't let friends sign petitions that give billionaires tax cuts and bankrupt our schools, Wash Dems. 7 rich white dudes are paying for this initiative to get richer. Decline to sign, call the hotline. And again, it says, new hotline, let us know if you see an I-1929 signature gatherer in Washington state. So again, it was a snitch line to say, take a picture. Text in a location of where people are daring to exercise their rights as voters of Washington state to put something on the ballot, their right as voters of Washington state to support a referendum, to repeal a law that has already been signed. So I am calling today, and this is not hyperbole, I think the Secretary of State's office should investigate these coordinated efforts by the state Democratic Party, by local county Democratic parties, to interfere in the democratic process. They cannot, by law, intimidate people from collecting signatures. They cannot, by law, intimidate voters from signing a referendum, from signing an initiative. If Republicans were engaged in this exact same behavior, do you think that it would be swept under the rug? It wouldn't. And I would ask them, why are you so scared? What are you so scared of? Why are you so freaked out by the prospect of Washington voters weighing in on a law that you go to these extremes? And again, if it were just private citizens who took it upon themselves to write up signs calling people Nazis and blowing a bullhorn, that's one thing. This is the state Democratic Party who has supported these efforts in the past. In the case of the event over the weekend in Lakewood, it was the county Democratic Party, the Pierce County Democratic Party. And again, when I was in Lacey, it was local Democratic people who work for the county party there, who were circulating the flyers calling me anti-transgender and encouraging people to show up. Yes, you have a First Amendment right to make your voice heard and to dissent on the collection of signatures for Referendum 101. You do not have a right under the law to intimidate people against signing it or to intimidate signature gatherers. That's exactly what you've done. So I will today be sending a letter to the Secretary of State encouraging him, if he is truly nonpartisan, to look into these actions by the state Democratic Party and by county Democratic parties. This would never fly if Republicans were doing it.